Maria was a woman who lived her life in a very simple way. She never cared much about luxury, big houses, or expensive dresses. People in her neighborhood often wondered how a woman like her could be the wife of a man as successful as Daniel. He was known in the business world as a strong, wealthy, and powerful figure, but Maria preferred to remain away from the spotlight. She loved the quiet charm of ordinary days and believed that true happiness was hidden in simple joys. Maria was raised in a small town where kindness was more valuable than money. Her parents were not rich, but they gave her something that wealth could not buy: good values, a strong heart, and respect for others. From a young age, she learned that every person deserves to be treated with dignity, no matter who they are. This thinking shaped her character as she grew into a gentle woman who carried warmth wherever she went. When she met Daniel many years ago, she had no idea about his wealth or power. She only saw a man with a genuine smile and caring nature. Their relationship was built on trust and love, not on money or status. Even after their marriage, Maria never changed her lifestyle. She cooked her own meals, wore simple clothes, and often preferred traveling without any special arrangements. Daniel respected this about her. He knew that while he managed empires, she managed to keep their lives grounded with her humility. One day, Maria needed to travel to another city to meet her old friend who was unwell. It was not a business trip or a holiday, but something personal and important for her heart. She wanted to be there for her friend, just like she always had been since their childhood. While booking her ticket, she did not think twice before choosing the economy seat. To her, it was just a seat on a plane that would take her where she needed to go. Comfort did not matter to her as much as reaching her friend quickly. The morning of her flight was bright and fresh. Maria dressed in her usual way, wearing a simple cotton dress and carrying a small handbag. She looked like any other traveler at the airport. She walked slowly, enjoying the sight of people rushing to their gates, parents holding their children's hands, and travelers reading their newspapers. She smiled at the little things: at a boy dragging a heavy bag, at a mother trying to calm her baby, at a young couple whispering excitedly about their holiday plans. Maria moved toward the boarding counter with calmness in her steps. She noticed a few people in line wearing shiny watches, designer clothes, and carrying large suitcases. Compared to them, she looked plain, but she never thought of herself as less. She always believed that appearances never defined a person's true value. When she handed her boarding pass to the airline staff, her eyes fell on the screen showing that the first-class section was almost empty. For a moment, she wondered if she could sit there. Not because she wanted luxury, but because she thought it would be quieter and she could read her book peacefully. She smiled kindly at the staff member and asked, in her gentle voice, if it was possible to upgrade her seat. The staff member, however, did not treat her with kindness. Instead of checking politely, they looked at her from head to toe and gave a short, dismissive laugh. "First class is not for everyone," the staff member muttered under their breath, but loud enough for Maria to hear. A few passengers nearby turned their heads, some with surprise, some with curiosity. Maria's cheeks grew warm, but she did not reply with anger. She only lowered her eyes and thanked the staff softly before walking toward her economy seat. As she moved down the aisle, Maria could hear the whispers of a few people behind her. Some thought she was silly for asking. Others chuckled quietly, thinking she did not fit the image of someone who belonged in first class. Maria held her head straight and walked with quiet dignity. She had always believed that the way people treat you says more about them than about you. She placed her small bag under the seat and sat down. The seat was firm, the space narrow, but she did not mind. She took out her book, the same one she had been reading for weeks, and began to turn the pages with calm interest. Her heart still carried a small sting from the rude behavior at the counter, but she told herself that life was too short to hold on to such moments. What Maria did not know was that her husband, Daniel, was also on this flight. He had boarded quietly, traveling under a different name as he often did for privacy. He was sitting in first class, hidden behind the tall seats and away from curious eyes. He had no idea that Maria was on the same plane. And she had no idea that the airline she was flying with belonged to her very own husband. To Maria, this was just another journey on just another day. She continued reading, her mind drifting between the words of the book and the thoughts of her sick friend she was going to visit. Her heart was filled with care for her friend, not with bitterness about what had happened at the counter. She thought about the old times they had shared, the laughter, the tears, and the promises to always stand by each other. For Maria, being there in times of need was more important than anything else. The airplane slowly began to fill with passengers, and soon the flight attendants started making announcements. Maria listened politely, fastening her seat belt and placing her hands neatly on her lap. She looked around and noticed different kinds of people, some tired from work, some excited about holidays, some nervous about flying. She smiled at an elderly man sitting across the aisle, who looked restless. Her smile calmed him, and he nodded back with relief. In that small moment, Maria showed her true nature. Even after being treated unfairly, she chose to spread warmth and kindness to those around her. She believed that even the smallest act of care could lighten someone else's burden. As the engines roared and the plane began to move, Maria closed her eyes for a moment. She whispered a small prayer for her friend, for the journey, and even for the people who had been unkind to her. She hoped that life would someday teach them to see beyond appearances. She did not know that life was already preparing a lesson for everyone on that flight, one that would come sooner than anyone expected. The plane was now high in the sky, moving steadily through the clouds. Passengers had settled into their seats, some watching movies, others listening to music, and a few quietly dozing off. Maria sat in her narrow seat, her small book resting on her lap. She tried to lose herself in the story, but her mind kept returning to the little incident at the boarding counter. She was not angry, but the rudeness she had faced lingered somewhere inside her heart. She wondered why people often judged others only by their clothes, their appearance, or the things they carried. She was dressed in a plain cotton dress, her shoes were simple, and she carried no expensive handbag. To the airline staff, she must have looked like someone who could never belong to first class. Maria shook her head gently. She reminded herself that the world had always been like this. Some people respected wealth more than kindness. Still, she could not help but feel a little sadness. As the flight went on, a flight attendant passed by, offering drinks. When it was Maria's turn, she smiled warmly and asked for a glass of water. The attendant gave her a quick look and handed the glass without much care, moving on quickly to serve others. Maria held the glass softly, sipping it without complaint. She had been taught never to treat people the way they treated her, but always the way she wished to be treated. Around her, she noticed other passengers. A businessman sitting 2 rows ahead called the staff loudly and demanded extra service. He received polite smiles and quick responses. A young woman in expensive jewelry asked for a blanket, and she was given one right away with special care. Maria observed these things quietly. She did not envy them, but she noticed the difference in behavior. For her, life was not about showing power, but she wished people would learn to value every person equally. As she sat there, she thought about Daniel. He was probably in some meeting, miles away in another city or country. She often joked with him that he was married more to his work than to her, but deep inside she admired his dedication. What Maria did not know was that Daniel was seated not too far away, in first class. He had boarded quietly and kept his identity hidden, as he often preferred to travel unnoticed. He did not like unnecessary attention, especially when it came to business trips. In first class, Daniel sat comfortably in a wide leather seat. He wore a dark jacket and simple glasses to avoid recognition. His mind was busy with thoughts of the company, meetings, and upcoming decisions. But soon, something unusual caught his attention. He overheard a few murmurs among passengers and staff about a woman in economy who had asked to be upgraded to first class but was turned away. Some described her as a plain woman who didn't look like she belonged. Daniel listened carefully, curiosity rising within him. He thought it was strange that such a small request could become the subject of gossip. But what surprised him even more was when he heard a detail that made his heart skip a beat. A staff member mentioned that the woman was carrying a small brown handbag and wearing a simple cotton dress. Daniel knew that description too well. His eyes widened, and he quickly leaned forward, realizing that it was none other than Maria, his wife. He could hardly believe it. His gentle, humble wife was on the same flight, seated in economy, and she had been denied an upgrade with disrespect. A wave of emotions swept over him: surprise, concern, and a growing sense of anger at the way she had been treated. But Daniel was a man who believed in patience. Instead of reacting immediately, he decided to stay quiet and observe. He wanted to see how Maria was handling the situation. He discreetly asked one of the senior attendants to check on the woman in economy without revealing their connection. When the attendant returned, they gave a short, dismissive reply, saying she seemed ordinary and there was nothing special about her. Daniel's jaw tightened at those words. Ordinary. That was the word they used to describe the woman who was the most extraordinary person in his life. Meanwhile, Maria sat calmly in her seat, her book still open. She had noticed people looking at her, whispering, and even smirking. But she did not let their behavior disturb her peace. She simply smiled faintly and kept reading. She even offered to help the elderly man across the aisle when his blanket slipped to the floor. She bent down, picked it up gently, and placed it back on his lap. The man thanked her warmly, and she replied with a kind nod. The flight continued, and meals were soon served. When the tray was placed in front of her, Maria thanked the attendant with genuine warmth, even though the attendant barely looked at her. She ate slowly, enjoying each bite, not because the food was special but because she believed in appreciating whatever was given to her. Around her, people rushed through their meals, complained about the taste, or pushed their trays away unfinished. Maria, however, ate with gratitude, her heart calm and steady. Daniel, watching from a distance, felt his admiration for her deepen. Even in the face of unkindness, she remained graceful. She did not demand respect, yet she carried herself with such dignity that it silently demanded respect anyway. He knew at that moment that Maria's quiet strength was far greater than the arrogance of those around her. After some time, Maria closed her book and looked out the window. The clouds outside looked like soft cotton, floating in the vast blue sky. She thought about her childhood, when she would lie on the grass with her friend, pointing at clouds and imagining shapes. She smiled at the memory, thinking of the very friend she was traveling to meet now. The thought of her sick friend waiting for her filled her with purpose, pushing aside any heaviness from earlier. Back in first class, Daniel made a decision. He would not reveal himself yet. He wanted to see the journey through, to witness how his wife's humble presence would contrast with the cold attitudes around her. But in his heart, he was already planning what he would say and do after the flight. He was not just angry for Maria, he was disappointed in the people who worked under his own company's name. An airline that belonged to him had allowed such behavior, and that thought troubled him deeply. As the plane moved through the long hours of the journey, Maria dozed off lightly, her head resting on the side. She looked peaceful, untouched by the bitterness that might have broken someone else in her place. Passengers around her still whispered occasionally, but Maria's calm silence seemed to quiet even their judgment after some time. It was as if her stillness carried a message that words could not. When the captain announced that they would be landing soon, Maria woke up and straightened her seat. She folded her blanket neatly and placed it back, careful to leave her space tidy. She believed that even small things showed a person's character. She gave a soft smile to the elderly man again, who now seemed more relaxed and comfortable, thanks to her earlier kindness. Daniel, meanwhile, sat in his seat, his mind sharper than ever. He had seen enough. He knew what he would do the moment the flight ended. But he also knew he would do it in a way that matched his wife's heart with firmness, but also with a lesson of kindness. The plane touched down smoothly, but the real journey was only about to begin. For Maria, this had been just another flight. For Daniel, it was the beginning of a lesson he would ensure his staff and his company never forgot. The airplane slowly rolled to a stop on the runway, and the seat belt sign switched off with a soft sound. Passengers around Maria stood quickly, pulling down their bags and rushing toward the exit. Maria, however, remained seated for a while, as she always preferred waiting until the crowd had thinned. She did not like pushing or rushing. She believed patience was a quiet form of grace. She gathered her small brown handbag, carefully checked that she had her ticket and book, and stood up with a gentle smile. The elderly man across the aisle smiled at her once more and thanked her for her kindness during the flight. Maria touched her heart lightly and nodded. "It was nothing," she said softly before stepping into the aisle. In first class, Daniel was also preparing to leave, but unlike the others, he did not appear restless. His eyes were fixed on the economy section. He waited deliberately until Maria was walking out. He wanted to see how people treated her when the flight was over. He also wanted to decide the right moment to reveal the truth about who he was. As Maria walked toward the exit, she heard a few whispers again. A group of young passengers who had seen the scene earlier at the counter still smirked when they saw her. "That's the one who wanted first class," one of them whispered with a chuckle. Maria ignored it. She had learned long ago that silence often had more power than arguments. When she stepped out of the plane into the bright terminal, she felt relief. The air outside the aircraft felt fresher, freer. She walked calmly, not knowing that Daniel was only a few steps behind her, still unrecognized in his simple disguise. At the arrivals area, Maria looked around for her luggage. She stood quietly by the belt as suitcases passed by, colorful and heavy. Around her, people rushed forward, pulling their bags quickly and often bumping into others without apology. Maria stood back patiently, waiting for her small suitcase to appear. When it finally came, she bent down, lifted it with both hands, and adjusted the strap on her shoulder. At that moment, a flight attendant who had served in first class passed by. The attendant did not recognize Maria as anyone important, but they remembered the earlier gossip. They spoke casually to another staff member, saying, "She was so desperate for first class, can you believe it?" The words were not meant for Maria, but she heard them clearly. For a brief second, she felt her chest tighten. But instead of replying, she held her bag firmly, lifted her chin slightly, and walked forward with quiet dignity. Daniel, watching from a short distance, clenched his fists in anger. His wife had been insulted twice, both times by people who worked under his company. He wanted to speak out right there, but he stopped himself. He knew that speaking in public would only embarrass Maria, who disliked attention. She valued privacy more than anything. Daniel respected that deeply, so he chose to wait for the right time. Maria moved toward the exit gate, where taxis and cars waited outside. She planned to take a cab to her friend's house. She had no idea that her husband was planning something entirely different. Daniel quickly made a call on his phone, speaking in a calm but firm tone to one of his senior managers. His voice was steady, but inside him was a storm. He instructed the manager to gather the staff who had worked on this flight as soon as possible. He wanted to meet them directly before leaving the airport. Maria, unaware of this, stepped out and hailed a cab. She was glad the long journey was over. As she placed her small suitcase in the car, she thought again about her sick friend and hoped her visit would bring comfort. Just as she was about to get in, she felt a familiar presence. She turned, and there stood Daniel, smiling warmly at her. At first, she was shocked. "Daniel?" "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice filled with surprise. Daniel adjusted his glasses and gave a soft laugh. "I could ask you the same thing. I didn't expect to see you on this flight." Maria shook her head lightly, smiling. "I had to come see my friend. I didn't want to bother you. You're always so busy." Daniel placed his hand gently on hers. "Maria, you never bother me. You are the most important part of my life." His words were soft, but his eyes carried a seriousness that Maria could sense. For a moment, Maria felt comfort in seeing her husband there. She forgot all about the unpleasant behavior she had faced earlier. She only felt happiness that Daniel was by her side. But Daniel's mind was still restless. He could not allow what had happened to go unaddressed. "Maria," he said quietly, "I know everything that happened. I was there in first class. I heard the way they spoke to you." Maria's eyes widened slightly. "You were there? You saw all that?" Daniel nodded firmly. "Yes, I did. And I cannot let it pass. You may have been calm and graceful, but I will not accept such treatment for you or for anyone." Maria touched his arm gently. "Daniel, please. Don't make a scene. They were unkind, yes, but maybe they were tired or stressed. Not everyone understands kindness. It's all right." But Daniel shook his head. "No, Maria. It is not all right. Respect should never depend on clothes, money, or status. Every passenger deserves dignity. If they cannot treat my wife with respect, how are they treating other people?" Maria fell silent. She knew her husband's heart. He was not just angry because she was his wife. He was upset because the behavior was wrong in principle. She also knew that once Daniel made up his mind, he always followed through. Within an hour, Daniel arranged for a private meeting in one of the airport's conference rooms. Maria hesitated to join him, but he insisted gently. "You don't have to speak, my love. Just be there. Your presence alone will teach them more than words." When the staff members who had worked on the flight walked in, they were shocked to see Daniel, the owner of the airline, waiting for them. Even more shocking was the sight of the simple woman they had mocked, standing quietly by his side. Whispers spread quickly among them, and their faces turned pale. Daniel stood tall and calm, but his eyes were sharp. He spoke in a steady voice. "This woman," he said, pointing gently toward Maria, "was denied kindness and respect on a flight that belongs to my company. She was judged by her clothes and appearance. She was whispered about and insulted. And yet, she remained graceful and silent. Do you know who she is? She is my wife. But that is not why you should have treated her better. You should have treated her better because she is a human being." The room was silent. No one dared to speak. Maria lowered her eyes, embarrassed by the attention, but she did not interrupt. Daniel's words were not spoken in anger, but with a calm authority that carried more weight than shouting ever could. He continued, "I do not want people in my company who believe respect is only for the wealthy. Every traveler, whether rich or poor, deserves the same courtesy. If you forget this, you not only fail as employees, you fail as people." Some staff members looked ashamed. Others stood stiffly, unable to meet his eyes. Maria, seeing their discomfort, felt her soft heart ache. She touched Daniel's arm lightly, signaling him to show mercy. Daniel looked at her and then back at the staff. "Because of her," he said slowly, "I will not dismiss you. But let this be your lesson. From today onward, I want every employee trained to treat all passengers with equal respect. And if this mistake happens again, there will be no second chance." The staff nodded quickly, their faces red with guilt. Maria gave them a gentle smile, as if to forgive them without words. Her kindness made the weight of their shame even heavier. As the meeting ended, Daniel and Maria walked out together. She leaned toward him and whispered softly, thank you for standing up for me. But thank you even more for not punishing them harshly. Daniel smiled at her, his heart filled with pride. You are the reason I find balance, Maria. You carry strength in silence, and I carry strength in action. Together, we remind each other what truly matters. Maria looked at him with tender eyes, realizing that her quiet dignity and his firm justice had created the perfect balance. Neither wealth nor power defined them, it was their hearts that did. And though the world often judged by appearances, Maria knew that the lesson Daniel had given today would remain with those staff members forever. What began as a simple flight had now become a turning point. It was not only a revelation for the staff but also a reminder for everyone that respect was never about class, it was about humanity. The meeting at the airport ended, but the echo of Daniel's words still lingered in the minds of the staff. For them, it had been a moment of awakening. For Maria, however, the attention she had received was uncomfortable. She never liked standing in the center of things. As she and Daniel walked out of the conference room, she held his arm gently and whispered, "You didn't have to do all that just for me." Daniel stopped and looked at her with calm seriousness. "Maria, I didn't do it just for you. I did it for everyone who travels with us. You handled their unkindness with grace, but what about others who may not have the strength you have? I cannot let such behavior continue in silence." Maria sighed softly. She understood his point. She admired how he always thought beyond himself, but still, her heart leaned toward forgiveness more than punishment. They walked together through the wide halls of the airport, passing strangers who had no idea that this simple-looking woman and the tall, quiet man beside her were the heart of a story that had just changed an entire company's way of thinking. Later that evening, Maria and Daniel sat together in a quiet hotel room. The city lights sparkled outside the window, but Maria's thoughts were far away. She thought about her sick friend, about the journey she had taken, and about the strange twist of fate that had placed her husband on the same flight. She turned to him and said softly, "You know, I really did not mind sitting in economy. For me, it was just a seat. What hurt me was not the seat, but the way I was looked at as if I was less than others." Daniel listened carefully, his hands folded together. "That is exactly the problem," he replied. "The seat doesn't matter. But respect does. A company that carries my name must not treat people that way. You may forgive easily, but I want to build a place where no one needs to feel what you felt." Maria smiled faintly. She loved this about him, the way he combined strength with responsibility. Yet she also knew his strong words had made the staff nervous and fearful. She hoped they would learn without holding bitterness in their hearts. "Promise me one thing," she said gently. "When you make new rules for them, teach them with kindness, not fear. Let them learn, not just obey." Daniel reached for her hand and nodded firmly. "I promise. Your way has always been softer, but it is the right way. I will make sure our people learn the value of respect in a way that changes them, not just controls them." The next morning, Daniel held a private meeting with his senior managers. Maria did not join, but she knew what he was doing. He explained to his managers that every staff member, from the ground team to the attendants in the air, would undergo new training. The training would not just focus on service, but also on humanity, on treating every passenger with equal dignity. He spoke firmly, but in his heart, he carried Maria's gentle request. He instructed them not to create fear among the workers, but to open their hearts and help them see why kindness mattered. News of the meeting spread quietly through the company. Employees began whispering about the story of the simple woman who turned out to be the owner's wife. Some were embarrassed, others thoughtful. For many, it was a shock that such a powerful man's wife chose to travel so simply, without using her status for privileges. The story itself became a silent teacher. People began to look at passengers differently, reminding themselves that appearances could not tell the whole story of a person. Meanwhile, Maria finally visited her friend. When she entered the small house, Her friend's eyes filled with tears of relief and happiness. Maria hugged her tightly, forgetting all the troubles of the flight. She spent the day by her bedside, listening, comforting, and laughing softly over old memories. Her friend asked her about the journey, and Maria only smiled and said, "It was a long flight, but I'm here now, and that's what matters." She did not speak of the rude treatment, nor of Daniel's revelation. She did not want her visit to carry the weight of complaints. She wanted it to be a time of warmth. But when Daniel came later to check on her, Maria's friend was surprised to see him. She knew Daniel was a busy man, and his presence spoke volumes about how deeply he cared for Maria. "You are lucky," her friend whispered to Maria when Daniel stepped outside for a call. "Not because he is rich, but because he sees you. That is rare." Maria smiled, her heart full. She realized again that love was not measured by wealth, but by the way someone stood by you when it mattered. During the following days, the airline began to change. Attendants were guided to show courtesy not only to those in luxury seats but also to those in economy. Managers shared Maria's story in training sessions, not as a warning but as an example of why humility mattered. They told the staff, "She could have been anyone. She could have been your neighbor, your teacher, your own mother. Respect is not for the rich, it is for everyone." For Maria, life returned to its simple rhythm. She did not crave the attention her story had created, and Daniel protected her privacy as much as he could. But she noticed subtle changes the next time she traveled. Attendants smiled warmly, not just at her but at everyone. They spoke politely even when passengers were tired or impatient. It made her heart lighter to see that her quiet struggle had planted seeds of change. One afternoon, Daniel came home with documents showing the new company policies. He placed them on the table in front of Maria and said, "This is because of you." Maria looked at the papers with surprise. "Because of me?" "Yes," Daniel said softly. "You taught me that true strength lies in dignity, not power. Your silence, your grace, it did what my anger alone could not. You showed me that change begins with an example, not with rules. So I made the rules, but the example was yours." Maria touched the papers gently, her eyes warm. She never imagined her quiet journey could ripple out into something so wide. She had only wanted to reach her friend, but along the way, she had touched lives she did not even know. That night, as they sat together, Daniel said something that Maria would never forget. "Do you realize, Maria, that you gave me the greatest lesson? You reminded me that even if I own planes, buildings, and companies, the real wealth is in how we treat people. Money may build an empire, but respect builds its foundation." Maria smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. She thought of the rude words she had heard, of the mocking glances, and of the whispers. They had hurt in the moment, but now she saw how those small wounds had led to a greater healing, not just for her, but for many. The journey that began with an insult had turned into a story of transformation. Maria's humility and Daniel's firm justice had come together to change the heart of an entire company. And while the world outside continued to chase wealth and status, Maria knew in her heart that the real first-class seat was not one with wide cushions and golden lights. It was the place where kindness lived. No matter where you Saturday, the weeks after the incident passed quietly for Maria, but the impact of what had happened continued to grow like ripples in water. She went back to her normal life, cooking in her small kitchen, watering the plants in her garden, and visiting her neighbors with a smile. To her, nothing about her own life had changed. She did not walk with pride because she was the owner's wife, nor did she think of herself as someone special. She was simply Maria, a woman who loved simplicity, who cared about people, and who believed in living with kindness. But within the walls of the airline company, her story was becoming a lesson. Managers spoke about her in training sessions, telling new staff how a passenger once asked for an upgrade and was turned away rudely, only to be revealed as the owner's wife. The real lesson, however, was not that she was married to a billionaire. The real lesson was that she had carried herself with quiet dignity even when disrespected, and that her silence had spoken louder than anger ever could. Employees began to talk to each other differently, reminding one another to look past appearances. Daniel continued to watch these changes with satisfaction, but he never took full credit for them. Whenever anyone praised him for the new rules or policies, he simply smiled and said, "It was my wife who inspired this." His managers often nodded in agreement, knowing that her presence had softened their employer's normally firm nature. At home, Maria never asked Daniel about the progress of the training or the rules. She trusted him to do what was right. Instead, she continued to focus on the small things she valued: writing letters to her friend, baking bread to share with neighbors, and reading books late into the night. Her days remained filled with little joys, and she was content. One afternoon, Daniel came home earlier than usual. He found Maria in the garden, her hands covered in soil as she replanted some flowers. He stood quietly for a moment, watching her. She looked so peaceful in her plain dress, her hair tied back, her face glowing with the sunlight. She looked nothing like the image people had of a wealthy man's wife. And that, Daniel thought, was exactly why he loved her. She was untouched by pride, unaffected by luxury. When Maria noticed him, she smiled. "You're home early today. Is everything all right?" Daniel walked closer and replied, "Everything is better than all right. I came home early because I wanted to share something with you." She wiped her hands on a cloth and looked at him curiously. "What is it?" Daniel handed her a small folder. Inside were letters written by airline employees. Some were handwritten, others typed. All of them carried the same message: gratitude. One letter read, "Thank you for reminding us that every person matters. I used to believe only wealthy passengers deserved my best, but now I see that kindness is for all." Another said, "Your silence that day taught me more than any training book could. I am sorry for the way we treated you, and I promise never to judge a passenger again." Maria's eyes grew soft as she read. She looked up at Daniel, touched. "You showed these to me because you want me to feel proud. But, Daniel, I only did what anyone should do. I didn't fight, I didn't argue. I just stayed quiet." Daniel shook his head gently. "No, Maria. That is what makes it powerful. Most people would have shouted or demanded respect. But you chose silence, and your silence held more weight than noise. That is why they remember it. That is why they have changed." Maria placed the letters back into the folder carefully. She did not see herself as a hero, but she felt grateful that something good had come from what had once been a painful moment. She whispered softly, "If even one person learns to be kinder, then it was worth it." The following month, Daniel invited Maria to attend a special event the airline was hosting. At first, she refused, saying she did not like attention. But Daniel persuaded her gently, telling her she didn't need to give a speech, only to sit beside him. "Your presence is enough," he said with a smile. On the day of the event, Maria wore a simple cream-colored dress. She did not wear diamonds or gold, only a small chain that had belonged to her mother. When she arrived with Daniel, the staff who once had mocked her now stood straighter, their faces filled with respect. They no longer saw just a plain woman, they saw a symbol of the values their company now wanted to uphold. During the event, Daniel spoke to the audience about the future of the airline. He talked about better service, improved facilities, and new routes. But when he came to the topic of respect, his voice softened. "This company can buy planes, but it cannot buy respect. That must come from the heart." A few weeks ago, someone reminded us of that truth. She reminded us without saying a single harsh word. She reminded us through her patience and her silence. And that someone is my wife. Maria lowered her eyes, embarrassed as the crowd applauded. She did not enjoy the attention, but she felt proud of Daniel's words. She realized that sometimes life places you in unexpected situations, not to humiliate you but to teach a greater lesson to many. After the event, several employees came forward to thank her personally. One young attendant said, "I was on that flight, ma'am. I laughed when others mocked you, and I regret it deeply. I have changed because of you." Maria smiled warmly and replied, "Then let that be your gift to others. Treat them with the kindness you wish someone had shown me that day." Her gentle reply left the young attendant in tears. As time went by, the airline became known not only for its wide seats and luxury lounges but also for the warmth of its staff. Passengers noticed the difference. They often said that the airline felt different from others, as if every traveler, no matter where they sat, was valued. Few knew the story behind the change, but for those who did, it was a quiet reminder that one woman's dignity had reshaped an entire company. At home, Maria never let this change her. She continued her life as before, simple and unassuming. She still took economy seats sometimes, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She enjoyed sitting among ordinary people, sharing their stories, and smiling at strangers. To her, life's true luxury was not found in wealth but in connection. Daniel often looked at her with pride, knowing that behind her modest smile was the reason his company had gained a new heart. He once told her, "You are my real first class, Maria. No seat, no title, no wealth can compare to the worth you carry." Maria only laughed gently and replied, "And you are the reason I can stay simple, Daniel. Because with you, I never have to prove who I am." Their story became a quiet legend within the company and among close friends. But to Maria, it was never about being remembered. It was about reminding people, even in small ways, that respect costs nothing but gives everything. The day she had been denied a seat had felt like an insult. But in the end, it had opened doors to something greater. It had taught employees humility, strengthened her husband's vision, and reminded countless people that humanity should never be divided into classes. As she sat one evening by the window, watching the sunset paint the sky with shades of gold and pink, Maria thought to herself, life has a strange way of teaching lessons. Sometimes it hurts, but the hurt can bloom into something beautiful. She smiled softly, closed her eyes, and whispered a silent prayer of gratitude for her friend who was now recovering, for her husband who stood by her, and for the chance life had given her to touch others' hearts without even trying. For Maria, the story had ended long ago when she walked out of the airplane quietly. But for the world around her, the story had only begun. And that was the true power of a simple woman whose silence spoke louder than wealth, louder than power, and louder than any first-class seat ever could.